Okay.
Hello, everyone. This one. Thank you. Good morning. Hello. Oh, I like this guy. Good to have you here. I'm Lihi. Delighted to be here after many months of working, having you here. We're very excited. Tim is more excited than I do, I think, just a bit. So as we deal with disasters, we couldn't start otherwise, right? So this thing doesn't work, so we're gonna improvise, right? This is part of most of yours professions, no? You improvise a lot. So thank you for being here. You will have coffee outside the whole day, so if you feel tired, feel free to go. This is the emergency exit, right, Washington? So that's also important. What else? Wi-Fi. You have on the A4 you received in the entrance, you have the Wi-Fi. It's the cloud, but you have to go through a process to put your data inside. It's a bit long, but I think you can manage. And that's it. We're going to have breaks throughout the day. And that's it. If you need anything, we are here. And Washington, thank you for having us. We're very excited. Now you're going to improvise without your slides. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lihi.
You need that or?
Yeah. So on behalf of Imperial College President and the entire Imperial community, I'd like to start by extending to all of you a very warm welcome to Imperial College London. I had a few slides that I wanted to use to introduce where you are, obviously the university and so on. So I'll try to do it without the slides because we have got a bit of a technical problem which is being looked at the moment. So I'd just like to contextualize what we're doing today by looking at what I call the threat vectors. It's a pentagonal structure that has dimensions including natural, biosocial, cyber, as well as the physical. And all of that is encompassed in something we call societal resilience. So very much aligned with the conference, the Resilient Renewable Planet. In my view, it's a global first. I've always joked with my colleagues that we are quite keen on a Davos style annual prestigious event, which is on science, innovation, and technology, as opposed to the Swiss's World Economic Forum. So I hope that we can begin to think about how we bring the world together to talk about resilience and so on. So before I say a few words about the university and so on, I'd just like to start by some housekeeping matters, which is that we are not planning any fire alerts or alarms. So please, if one goes, follow the exit signs onto the outside there next to the statue. There's a statue just along Imperial College Road. There will also be fire marshals that will lead you to safety. It's 999, obviously, if something is pretty serious is happening. It's 111 if you want to contact the National Health Service, and so on. Please let us know if you have any, or you need any difficulty, you need anything, we will be able to help you. So anyway, going back to Imperial College London, it is one of the top 10 universities in the world, top 3 in the United Kingdom. I'm sure you know the other 2, Oxford and Cambridge. And we pride ourselves really in terms of solving global challenges. We're a global university solving global challenges. So we have a number of overarching themes, one of which is a resilient society. The others are healthy society, smart society, and sustainable society. We in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering reflect that. We being the infrastructure people, so infrastructure resilience is very much in what we do, but we also work with other colleagues and other entities within the Imperial College London, one of which is the Institute for Security Science and Technology, ISST, where I am the Senior Security Science Fellow, and also the champion of societal resilience across Imperial College London. I'm also on the management board of Imperial Space Laboratory, that brings together all our space interests. And I had a nice slide, which I'll show you tomorrow morning, on Imperial's presence in space. Not least, the other day in the JUICE program, the JUICE mission has got Imperial's magnetometer in it, wanting to find out if that particular moon has water, geomagnetic fields, and so on, and potentially could support life. So we are very much present in space. Now, the United Kingdom has 13 critical national infrastructure sectors, of which space is one. I'm aware that the United States has 16 and so on. But the interconnectedness of all of these sectors working together to deliver services is obviously quite key to ensuring that we do not consider each of the sectors alone. So, for example, the power sector, the energy sector coexists together with the others. And so that connectivity means that we need to approach resilience from an integrated, holistic perspective. So thank you very much for coming. It's great to see the whole world represented here in person, but also those colleagues who are listening online. So mine is really on behalf of the president and the community here at Imperial to really welcome you warmly and to tell you that we're here to support you in any way possible, and that we can also find ways at the end of this particular conference in terms of working together going forward. I was also reminded to say that the agenda is flexible to change, so please bear with us. We actually, maybe people dropping in and out and so on, but we will be informing you in due time when we need to alter an agenda over the next 2.5 days. So it is my absolute pleasure now to welcome a colleague and friend that we have actually managed to meet face to face for the first time, but we've met so many times. I thought Avi was very tall, and Avi thought I was very short. So here we are. Please welcome the EIS President, Mr. Avish Noor, to say a few words and to officially open the R2P conference. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor, and I have to say it is wonderful to be here, and really, Washington, you and your team have been central in creating an opportunity which we're now realizing today. Can you hear me okay if I don't carry this around?
Yeah.
Yes? This is okay like this? Okay. All right. So first of all, this certainly did not come together by itself. And Washington, you and your team, and Tim and Jenny, and certainly everyone from our team, Lihi and Chris and Udi Ganani and everyone else who's been involved, and all of you for taking the trouble to actually come here today. I think this is extremely important. And as you said, Professor, this represents the beginning of what we're hoping, I should say the new beginning, can help to move things in a direction that we have not yet achieved. I would put it this way. I think one can say that there are two different dimensions which together represent something unique. Let's call it a unique risk in the phase of history that we find ourselves today. The first is what you mentioned, Professor. Everything is interconnected. Everything is interdependent. And we usually think of that in a very appropriate way as something positive that gives us all the efficiencies that keep 80 billion of us so alive and as often as possible reasonably happy. But the problem is when you have an integrated system, and it becomes so integrated it's almost organic in nature. When you take an organ out of an organic system, the rest of it doesn't function so well. Much more efficient than what we've had throughout the rest of history, but also a new class of systemic vulnerability. That's critical. It's not something that we, humanity, has any experience at all with. It never happened before. And this kind of civilization scale fragility really, if we want our civilization to continue, needs to be addressed. That's one of the two dimensions. The other dimension is that we are now in a phase of history in which we are facing an expanding set of what we often call black sky hazards, which refers to, it's a term of art that today refers to, whereas in the power industry, there are blue sky days, there are gray sky days. Gray sky day for the power industry would be perhaps a serious hurricane. This would be far worse. These would be events that could cause the failure or the disruption of a very large segment of the power grid, or potentially even a full national grid. When we see the kinds of hazards we've had recently, which all of us, of course, are familiar with, these give us some hint of what we could face if they were just enough worse to cause the interdependent fragility that now keeps everything going to come apart. So the real question when it comes to resilience in the modern reality is, do we wish to be prepared for events on this scale? My personal answer is yes. I think civilization is a good thing. Most people would agree, but the irony is, if you look around, I have not yet found the global resilience chief. We can take it. But who
every time you touch it, it goes away.
Pretty exciting. Well, I kind of like the blue.
Yeah.
In spite of all of the continuing attempts of the technical team, there does not seem to be a global resilience chief, and we live on a globe that now has this new scale of vulnerabilities. So if this is going to change, and if in fact we're going to move beyond where we've been, something is going to need to be done. And I think all of us here, Imperial College London, the Electric Infrastructure Security Council, all of your organizations, your colleagues, those listening online, represent a very unique group. And what's unique about all of us collectively is, on the one hand, like an increasing number of organizations, we recognize these twin issues. The hazards, the extreme hazards, are getting worse. And we have a new kind of systemic fragility that we've introduced into society. But the difference is, I think you're here, we're here, because we feel that this creates a compulsion to actually do something about it. Admiring the problem, as is often said, just is not going to be sufficient. So my hope is that this conference, this event, can become the beginning, the inaugural event for some new kinds of capabilities, some new kinds of efforts. And it's going to take collective, collaborative effort. The new Davos style, in terms of looking at both technology and innovation together that you suggested, Professor, the Human Continuity Project, which represents a continuing, ongoing new opportunity for organizations to simply come together and collaboratively decide, okay, the planet needs to recognize this as a civilization scale set of concerns. It cannot be addressed separately from climate change concerns. It can't be addressed separately from the needs for handling global supply chain issues and hunger issues and inflation and the whole set of economic matrices that we deal with. All of these need to be addressed together, and the only way to do that is to create a very large tent and a collaborative effort to add this as a major global set of efforts that need to come together for the world. So I invite all of you, all of us, to, at this conference over the next few days, think about what can be done, what we can do to actually start moving forward. We will hear more as time goes on about this new activity that you mentioned, Professor. The Human Continuity Project, many organizations that are here today, many of you personally are already planning to participate in that. Others, I recommend joining as well, and we'll talk more about that over the next several days. Or if there's something better, let's find whatever it is that's better to bring everyone together to focus on this problem. But let's do something. Let's move beyond where we have been and start moving this process forward, really to create a resilient future for all of humankind and for the planet. And that's going to take us focusing on all of the concerns, all of the interdependent concerns that we have. So thank you very much.
Washington and Avi, thank you both very much indeed for starting this conference in the tone of the importance that it really, really deserves. My name is James Arbuthnot. I am chairing this morning's session, and we start with two keynote speakers, Juliette Mian and James Robb. Juliette, shall we start with you, if that's okay?
I was ready to do it without slides, but we're ready. My slides are there, so what a relief. Less eye contact needed. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here. Sometimes daunting to go first, but it also means that I can relax very soon and just listen to what everybody else has to say, so that would be great. I wanted to...
Juliet, can you move over so the camera can catch you for those that are going on?
Okay, I'm near enough to the mic, so yeah. Wave if anybody
you can
can't.
move that mic a little closer to you. There's a handheld one.
Which one? Okay, I'm not going to. I'll just put it in front of me. If anybody at the back can't hear, yeah. Please wave. So to briefly introduce myself, not because I want to use this slot just to give you all my biography, but I do think it's important to understand where we're all coming from in our approach to sort of solving resilience challenges. So I'm a civil engineer. I arrived at South Kensington, fresh-faced undergraduate at the Department of Civil Engineering in 1992, which is somewhat depressing. I know that all of the students now were not even born when I first got here. I started my career as a geotechnical engineer, and I specialised and did my PhD also here at Imperial College in earthquake hazard and risk. So that route towards resilience from infrastructure, from civil engineering and from dealing with natural hazards is important. And again, one of my sort of themes for this talk is that we have all arrived at what we're thinking about now from different routes in different directions, which I think is really important. I work at Arup now. I have worked at Arup actually since I was a graduate, and my current role is in the climate and sustainability services portfolio, where I lead a team of specialists dealing with both the resilience challenges and also the climate change and decarbonisation challenges. Globally, I lead in our Skills Network for Resilience, which is a community of people, again, from all across the business, hundreds of people from different parts of the world, all looking to deliver and help their clients with resilience challenges. That's a really important part of sort of what I'm bringing to this talk. So a little bit about Arup. Hopefully many of you will have heard of us already. We're a global design consultancy, 18,000 people around the world, made up of designers, planners, consultants, engineers, all working across the built environment with sustainable development at its heart. Arup is an employee-owned organisation. We're not accountable to shareholders, and that does give us a very different sort of ethos and way of looking at our challenges. It means we're a purpose-driven organisation, and actually everything we do is focused on creating a sustainable future for everyone. So my own work focuses on projects which, to a greater or lesser degree, are helping our clients meet resilience challenges. Some of those projects have resilience sort of front and centre of what we're doing. Others are bigger sort of major infrastructure projects around the world where resilience is a very important contribution towards a bigger multidisciplinary challenge. So I think one of the things I wanted to say is that my expertise in resilience is not just my own. The reason I'm invited to stand here and give keynotes and sort of contribute to these discussions is actually because of the network of people that I work with, working with Avi and others over the years. You know, what I've learned is that everybody has something to contribute, and no single person. Actually, Avi, I think your idea of one global chief resilience officer is probably not what we need, because we need so many people coming at this from different parts of the problem. So bringing that multidisciplinary and multifaceted approach to solutions, I think is really important. That's probably what I wanted to focus on around my talk today, whether it's who's solving the challenges, how we set about solving these challenges, or what we actually deliver, and thinking about that across the socio-ecological and technical parts of our system. I'm showing on my opening slide here climate change as one of the biggest challenges that we deal with. I appreciate it's not the only resilience challenge that we're looking at. There are many other things that we know about, but also that we don't know about, that we need to be dealing with. But I'm actually quite comfortable sort of framing my talk within the context of climate change, because it's so truly systemic, because climate change is impacting every part of the system and every part of the planet. Almost everything else that we think about, whether it would be an earthquake or pandemic or multiple other challenges, are still happening within that context of climate change. And not only the physical challenges of climate change and all the different hazards that actually come into that one single triangle, whether it's wildfire or heat stress or flooding or sea level rise, but also the behaviour changes and the transition of all our systems to mitigate the impacts of climate change. I did want to sort of frame these opening remarks in the context of climate change. And I think it would be foolish not to sort of reflect and acknowledge that action is not where it needs to be in terms of climate change. So to the one side, we need to be adapting our systems so that they are resilient in the face of climate change, but the actions to mitigate the impacts of climate change are not where they should be. And again, particularly where we're talking about electricity systems and the sort of theme for this conference, that need to decarbonise is central to this. And all the work we do at Arup, and it's why I have a team approaching this challenge from both sides, is we can't focus on only one part. We can't focus on getting to net zero and then come back and say, oh, but we didn't do that in a way that was resilient. And we can't focus on building resilience and then realised that actually we put more carbon into the atmosphere as we were doing that. So the need to bring those two things together is essential. The importance of renewable energy within this is huge. So within the IPCC report that I've taken one figure from here, the role of renewables and their potential to get us towards where we need to in terms of climate mitigation is the biggest. They have the biggest potential for reducing carbon, and they also have the lowest relative cost compared to many of the other solutions. So renewables really are sort of inherent within this challenge. But as I said, the climate's changing already. We know this. The work that we do in the organisations that I advise, to some extent, are caught between a rock and a hard place. They have to adapt to the changing climate that we're already seeing, and they have to change their systems to get towards net zero to ensure that the impacts of climate change aren't any worse. But I think one of the things that we sometimes miss in these debates is the counterfactual. Not doing these is even worse. And quite often the clients that we're working with can see the cost of adapting and they can see the cost of mitigating, but they can't necessarily see the cost of doing nothing, looking out to 2040, 2050, if we don't do anything now. So I think the urgency of action now is a really important theme for this conference. To talk a bit more about electricity systems, and they're a perfect example of this bringing together of the two climate challenges. The implications of climate change on electricity systems. I've already mentioned the shift to renewable. 5 minutes, sure. Shift to renewable energy, shifts in demand, modal shifts in things like transport, changes that we need to make to buildings to be more energy efficient, and all of that again within the context of extreme events. So there's so many impacts on the resilience challenges, and as Abby's already framed, these are not unilateral. They don't come from one direction and impact one part of the system, and we need to sort of keep that in our thinking the whole time. And of course, looking at that from a societal point of view, the impacts of disruptions to energy and electricity supply can be life-threatening. I've mentioned here there's some work that Arup did for NYSERDA in New York, the New York State Energy Research Department. And we approach this from a different way, not so much from the perspectives like we would for National Grid of what can be done to build the resilience of the system, but what happens if the lights do go out? Looking at that from the perspective of vulnerable communities, low-income communities, single-family dwellings. And again, that same context, that it's a multifaceted solution. There's not a single silver bullet, even if we had all the money in the world, that will increase and make those communities resilient. But there are many different pathways that we can follow, whether we're looking at interventions to the buildings and homes that people live in, community centres, policy changes, communications, and also obviously the interventions to the system. Looking at the work that we did for National Grid, I just briefly mention that because that is coming at this from the other side, looking at the resilience of the physical system, but recognising that on its own isn't enough. The resilience of the organisation to be responsive, to be adaptive when unexpected events happen, and the resourcefulness of the staff, the people who work for that organisation, and the supply chain that they're part of. So again, there's so many different. Probably it's a bit of a simplification, but it always is, because I come from a resilience background, to say that actually on the mitigation side, it's simple. We need to reduce greenhouse gases. On the resilience side, very far from simple, because there are so many different things that we need to change and that we need to reflect on. I'll jump past that the rest of time. So I think I'll jump past. One of the project examples I wanted to mention, because I do think this is a very good example of systemic intervention. So Arup was involved since 2020 in a government-to-government project with the government of Peru, working with partners LACE and GLEADS. This was a response to El Nino and the catastrophic damage that the floods caused in Peru. Why this is such a great example of a system-level response. So the actual interventions included healthcare facilities. I've got my numbers somewhere, but there were 15 healthcare facilities, 74 schools, but also catchment level interventions to reduce the severity of flooding in the future. And that's where I think already I've talked about the technical part of the system. I've talked about the impact on that system for society, but to bring nature into that sort of front and centre of our thinking, to be able to understand not only how our systems depend on and interact with nature, but also what can we actually do working with nature to build more resilience. And even going beyond that now to really importantly, what are we doing to restore and revive natural systems? So in the case of Peru, there was 17 river catchments, and we looked at this at a catchment scale level. We looked at nature-based solutions, so tree planting, terracing, earthwork, soil restoration. That brought a significant mitigation of the flood risk, but also they're lower cost, they're lower capital cost solutions, they're lower carbon solutions, they're able to sequester carbon as well. And they're bringing with them new jobs, new employment, new opportunities. So it's changing the agriculture in Peru. It's training and nurturing skills in forestry. There were 56 million seedlings planted as part of this project. So that's a whole new sort of economy and training. I got slightly out of it. Just closing comments. I think just bringing it back, having talked about technical, natural, but bringing this back to society. Similar to Washington's framing, I focus very much on the resilience of infrastructure, but also, and possibly this wasn't so much part of our teaching in 1992, but very conscious that we're not designing resilient infrastructure for the sake of a bridge that is resilient, but designing it because society depends on it. We always need to have in mind the projects that we're delivering, they're protecting people, they're providing critical services, they're connecting people to their jobs, employment, education, and it's the resilience of those services that will help society and to help us make sure that we're not simply depending on individuals to be able to deal with whatever life throws at them, but we're providing those essential services. So I think I wanted to close just with a very similar reflection to Avi's, that we are all coming to this challenge from different places. And I think I'm really looking forward to listening to the range of skills and expertise over the next couple of days and seeing how we can join up those dots to really make a change for resilience, very similar to Avi's reflection. So I'll leave it.
Thank you very much. And our second keynote speech is James Robb, who's just done.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I don't have any slides, so that's going to solve that problem. Sorry. You can hear me okay, I'm assuming? Yeah. Okay, great. So let me just give a little background of the perspective that I bring to this. So I'm the CEO of something called the North American Electric Reliability Corporation in the US. We're designed to be an obscure little regulatory agency that's off in the corner. But over the last several years, as the electric sector in North America has evolved, we've become a little bit more prominent. I always kind of joke that I'm not supposed to be on the Today Show, but I was on the Today Show last summer. So I think that shows some of the issues of how people are reacting to the resilience and reliability of the electric grid and concerns that are being raised around that as we navigate the transition that's prompted, the consequence of climate change and all the policies that we're putting in place to deal with that. So what I'm going to give you today is a very North American perspective. However, I think from my work with the United Nations and so forth, the issues are pretty similar as we go across the globe. And I'll talk about the risk environment that we're in right now, which I've described in many forums as being hyper complex. Hyper because it's coming at us very, very fast, and complex because we're seeing changes on multiple dimensions in an industry that really hasn't seen multidimensional rapid change throughout much of its history. So it's really challenging a lot of norms that we have around designing, planning, operating the electric grid. And I always describe this as risk because risks can be managed if you understand them. And one of the things that we're trying our best to do is to understand the risk environment that we're operating in and the kinds of mitigations that can be put in place to address it. So in terms of risk environment, I talk about four major things that are happening. The root of most is the transition of the resource base away from what we would call traditional generation, which in the US had a history of coal, oil, nuclear, with some hobby resources on the side. Most of those resources are retiring. They're at their end of their life, or environmental regulations are forcing them into retirement. And with that, we lose not only the energy and capacity that they produced, but also what we call essential reliability services. And those are the things that allow the electric grid to actually operate. The ability for the grid to maintain frequency and be able to maintain voltage. Those needs are not going away, but they were provided as just a byproduct of having that kind of large spinning mass generation. That generation is going away, and it's being replaced with natural gas, which is a terrific resource in a number of dimensions. But the security of supply, and not the resource in the ground, but the ability of the pipes to actually deliver it to the power plant when needed, particularly during cold weather events, is becoming an issue. If you're interested in this topic, I would suggest you read the NERC-FERC joint report on Winter Storm Uri that exposed in Technicolor the issues related to the interdependence of the natural gas system and the electric grid in Texas, but it's the same as you move across the continent. With those resources retiring, the other major resource base that's coming in are what we call inverter-based resources. So solar predominantly. Batteries also interconnect with the grid through an inverter. And an inverter is a power electronic device that converts a DC power source into an AC source to integrate with the grid. The issue with that is that they don't naturally provide these reliability services. They can, but they have to be told to. And they're generally not told to. The other thing about these devices is that left to their own device, if they see a small disturbance on the grid, they'll panic and they'll trip offline because they want to protect the equipment that's behind them. The issue is that when you get lots of these resources responding to the same signal, you can see large amounts of generation trip offline. One of the best papers we've written on this was an event in West Texas last summer, where a very modest disturbance on the grid resulted in 1,700 megawatts of solar PV tripping off. That resulted in a larger disturbance on the grid, 800 megawatts of conventional generation tripped off. So we lost 2.5 gigawatts of generation in no time, based on a very modest disturbance on the grid. That's 2.5 nuclear units. This was in West Texas, and the grid operator was preparing to shed load as a result. So these are the kinds of issues with inverters that we need to study, we need to understand, and we need to tell the inverters how to behave on the system. This hasn't been an issue up until now, but now that inverters are such a large portion of the resource space, it's become very, very important. Second are the extreme weather complexities resulting from climate change. And I always have to preface it when I say extreme, I don't mean infrequent. We've had 5 major cold weather events in North America over the last 10 years. We've had 3 major heat events in each of the last 3 summers. So these are not infrequent, but they are extreme. And by extreme, I mean broader in terms of the area of the continent being impacted, longer in terms of duration, and deeper in terms of the temperatures that we're seeing, either colder than planned for or much warmer than planned for. Each of those create nightmares for electric grid operators and planners, and need to be understood. Third is electrification policy. At least in the North American context, we've seen very little load growth over the last 20 years, largely driven by sustained investment in energy efficiency, turnover of appliances, and general awareness of the environmental footprint of the electric sector. We're now seeing forecasts of growth on the order of 7 to 10% per year, driven by the expansion of electric transportation, as well as space heating and the use of heat pumps. Issues there. I was chatting with Terry Boston earlier. I have a Mustang electric vehicle in the U.S. I was driving to visit my parents in Indiana last week and pulled into a Walmart parking lot where there were 4 350 kilowatt and 4 150 kilowatt charging stations, all occupied. That's 2 megawatts of load. And that's in a parking lot of a Walmart. And I'm pretty sure the Walmart's load itself was probably less than 500 kilowatt. So these kinds of loads are large and they're can be very, very impactful if they're not planned for. And then the last thing I'll talk about is just the rapidly evolving threat landscape in the security world. Whether it's software vulnerabilities, in 2022, there was something like 70 software vulnerabilities discovered a day, each of which at some level requires an assessment as to whether you're exposed to it, what the mitigations are, and get a patch in place if you need to. That's an almost unsustainable amount of work for the security professionals in the sector. Tom Wilson is nodding, so he agrees with me on that. Supply chain attacks. The vulnerability of the basic equipment on the grid, the uncertainty as to where all the components came from and the software that's running that creates an extraordinary exposure to the sector. Ransomware, we've had a number of very high profile ransomware events in the US, none in the electric sector, at least in the bulk part of the sector that I pay attention to. But in the fuel sector, there was a major event with one of the major gas pipelines on the eastern seaboard 2 years ago, Colonial Pipeline, you probably heard about that. They shut down gas supply, gasoline, liquid products, not natural gas, to the eastern seaboard for about 5 days. And it only took about a day before we saw a massive price response and shortages. Thinking what that would be like had there been a natural gas pipeline, the entire eastern seaboard of the U.S. would have had real issues with its electric sector that week. But also now we're also seeing ransomware in service industries and suppliers to the electric sector, engineering and construction firms. A very high profile event with Sargent and Lundy. Last fall, there was a Canadian engineering and construction firm not too long ago that announced a big ransomware event. These are concerning because these firms have privileged access to a lot of the data and information that their customer base in the electric sector. So we need to be really thoughtful about how we share data with third parties and how that data is protected. And then lastly, physical attacks. And this has been a very high profile topic in the US. I'll be speaking to the FERC commissioners on Thursday on a report we did on physical security environment. We see lots of physical security events on the grid. Typically, they're nuisance, vandalism, and so forth. But over the last 6 months, we've seen much more thoughtful, much more intentional attacks on electric equipment. We've seen outages in North Carolina last November, Seattle, Tacoma over Christmas. And you may have read that the FBI thwarted a coordinated attack against Baltimore earlier this year. So the physical security environment is very concerning, particularly given the inherent vulnerability of electric infrastructure being very dispersed, sprawling, and above ground, and generally not in high trafficked areas where there's a lot of visibility. So criminals can do their stuff unobserved if they so choose. So those are the 4 major areas. They result in 5 concerns, and I'll take through these very quickly. I suspect I'm short on time. Yeah, so it'll be just five real quick things. So first of all, fuel assurance. We spend a lot of time talking about capacity and the capacity on the grid. Capacity no longer brings much with it. It's still necessary, it's still very important, but we need to understand fuel and whether there's going to be fuel behind it and the ability of that capacity to actually provide energy, as well as how we're going to provide the reliability services to grid operate sustainably. The loss of these reliability services is underappreciated, very, very critical. We need to be thinking about whether we're making the right investments in infrastructure hardening. For resilience, so we don't have critical assets that if one gets taken out creates a consequence for the whole grid, and how we prepare ourselves for any sort of coordinated attack, whether physical or cyberspace. We need to be very thoughtful about the expanding cyber service that we have, expansion of control systems, make sure they're well protected against adversaries. A lot of these inverter-based resources are inherently networked. Need to have some sort of control access to them, but we need to make sure that we're always making sure that the right people have access to those systems and not the bad guys. And then the whole Internet of Things, or what I call the Internet of Threats, which we need to be thoughtful about. And EV charging stations is probably the next big thing for us to be thoughtful about. how those loads are protected. And then the sophistication of cyber attacks. And I'll close here just reflecting on the SolarWinds attack from a couple years ago. What was very sobering about that is that it reflected an adversary solving what we call the one-to-one problem with a one-to-many solution. So the one-to-one problem is that in order to taking out any one asset is very, very difficult, given the complexities of understanding on how to get in and then what you got if you got it. So if you think about trying to get multiple assets, it's a very low percentage game that someone's playing. But if you can infect a system like SolarWinds that's commonly used almost ubiquitously across industry, and then use that as a vehicle for attacking all of their customer systems, you've inherently gotten away from the one-to-one problem to the one-to-many solution. So this whole notion of how we make sure that our supply chain and software products are well protected is really very critical, because a corruption in something like that, particularly a capability that allows an adversary to traverse networks, becomes potentially the very bad day. So with that, I should probably get off your stage. Thank you very much.
We now move on to the panel on what are the risks and are we resilient? That's a big question. So would the panel like to join me down here? Yeah. I can see Alan right at the back, where he should be right at the front. You can't hear. I gather it's very hard to hear. This is better, so we'll pick up the microphone as we speak.
It's just
Are we wrong order?
we're on the next.
Okay.
1 second. We have the agenda on the website, so because the slides are not working, so it's going to be easier if you would like to download the agenda to your mobile phones.
Right. Well, I'd like to introduce then our panel. Lawrence Marzell, founder of Whole System Approach and project leader of Pro Bono H in 2020 and the former innovation lead of Serco. There's Professor Yoav Yair, Dean of the School of Sustainability of the Reichman University of Israel, and Dr. Alan Mendoza, co-founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society of the United Kingdom. We are asked to identify what are the current risks, how serious are they, and how confident are we in our resilience? A small question. So a year ago, I chaired a House of Lords Committee on Risk, and we chose to concentrate on climate change, pandemics, artificial intelligence, and infrastructure. But we could have chosen nuclear war, population growth, pollution, or any number of other challenges that we face. And today we have an experienced panel with widely different backgrounds to help us answer the question on the exam sheet. And Lawrence, I'm going to start with you. What keeps you awake at night?
Probably too much alcohol. Brutally honest.
Can you use the microphone?
Can everybody hear me? Yes, thank you. Well, thank you and good morning. Interestingly, I've been involved in resilience and critical national infrastructure for the best part of a decade, 12 years, my work in Serco. And although the threats and risks have developed, emerged, evolved, changed, nuclear, climate change, etc., cyber, I actually think what really should concern us doesn't particularly keep me awake, but what should concern us, hasn't changed. And for example, I led a UK government critical national infrastructure project around station system of systems, safety, security, resilience, cross-government funded by contest and counter-terrorist strategy. And governance, people, policy, silo approach from legislators, government agencies, and organizations still remains with us. And the conversation we are having now about interdependency and the interconnectivity of our world, those things around people-based resilience hasn't changed. So we are no more resilient in that perspective than anything else. The technological, physical built infrastructure, as we heard from our two speakers earlier, those have changed. They are better, and as we understand new technology better, and we start to think about resilience and how those are designed and built in, then physically and technically they will be more resilient to those threats. But the governance, the people and the policy aspects are human. And until we understand how to step back from an individualistic approach to risk, for a more collective approach to risk, and then travel forward towards a shared outcomes, the resilience aspects won't improve.
Thanks very much. I want to come back to you shortly about the issue that you proposed about combined effect and how we can make things better, because the purpose of this conference is not, as Avi said, to admire the problem, but to come up with solutions to what it is that we're facing. So that's part of the issues that we're facing. Yoav, can I turn to you and ask you to tell us what weather, you're a professor of geophysics, what has weather got to do with all this?
Well, thank you. As the previous speakers already noted, climate change is the most urgent, in my mind, threat that we will be facing. And I think overall, we are underestimating it. Climate models tend to be rather, I would say, conservative in their estimations. And we saw those graphs that you show gradual increase in temperature and the following cascade of sea level rise, et cetera, those global changes that we think we are going to experience in a moderate rate through the coming decades. I think we are looking at it the wrong way. We are underestimating the powerful feedback mechanisms that are lurking, maybe identifiable as 5 or 6 points of no return. I'm especially worried about the ice albedo feedback. Like if you put away large pieces of the polar caps, that Earth albedo will change quite substantially, which will in effect change very fast the climate machine as we know it today. So I think we should maybe look at not just gradual, but stepwise. We may be facing a severe stepwise in the next decade or two, and I already see signs of that. I think you people in the UK faced a 43 centigrade summer last year, right? Prepare for the next one. I suppose we come from the Middle East, so we don't bother much about a degree or two, but in Europe in general, the US or other northern countries, such extreme events will become longer, more frequent, and substantially influence, you said, weather. I think the entire population of the planet, all those cascading effects of change supply, etc. And let me just bring one more thing, about basic thermodynamics. As the atmosphere becomes warmer, it can contain more water vapor. And we see this already in the average intensity of tropical storms, thunderstorms. I study lightning, for example, so we see more and more strong thunderstorms with substantially energetic, more strong superbolts, lightning superbolts, which we call these are 10 to the 9th, 10 to the 10th joules per strike. So prepare for that. I mean, not only for the gradual increase, but for a stepwise, really rapid decline in our ability to forecast correctly what's coming ahead.
That's terrestrial weather.
Yes, I was only talking about terrestrial weather. I can maybe add a little bit more if we have a second round to talk about solar cycle 25, which is actually, in a sense, related to our, I wouldn't say incomplete, I would say insufficient scientific understanding, not only of the internal climate machine, but also we do not understand the sun quite well. And we had a meeting at my university a couple of months ago trying to predict solar cycle 25, and every model failed because we see now that solar cycle 25, which was supposed to be maybe a little bit stronger than 24, is now faster and rising to its peak a year ahead of time. It's going to reach solar max maybe this December or early 2024. And it's going to be a lot more dangerous in my mind because the frequency of solar events is picking up. We didn't see this coming, which points out to, I think, our general insufficient lack of understanding of those processes in the sun and in the climate system.
Sorry. Thank you. Thanks very much, Johan. Paul. My apologies. That's a natural set of threats. The human factor has been seen rather largely in the last year, and we've seen Putin invading Ukraine. What would you say the human factors in this are?
Well, it's very interesting, James. The sort of very cheery panel, I call it the global death panel, basically, discussing how to kill ourselves. But obviously the human factor comes into the climate change, which I'm sure will emerge. But specifically from what you're saying, I think we've mentioned nuclear threats already as sort of potential. I think for a long time we had the sort of luxury of thinking, oh, this nuclear issue is sort of behind us. We all understand how we deal with nuclear weapons. We put them in a box. We pretend they're not there. Nobody's serious about using them. I think, unfortunately, in the last year, the rhetoric in particular that Vladimir Putin has adopted in terms of the casualness, the ease with which he references, the use of potential nuclear or ultimate weapons, takes us back to an early age when we didn't have this framework of use and understanding. And I think the problem is that firstly, you have the very real prospect now, for the first time in many, many years, that somebody might actually decide, for whatever reason, to use a nuclear weapon, maybe not a strategic one, but a tactical one on the battlefield, which would be a shock, of course, to the human system. But also, you face other potential issues. For example, the EIS summits, the early ones, dealt a lot with the idea of, if you like, a nuclear explosion that could then knock out electronics, etc. Well, we know that the Chinese, for example, have long had, sort of doctrinal examinations of this idea within their military modelling and their training. And given what you've been seeing with the ramping up of sort of aggression towards Taiwan, which is an obvious target for an EMP strike, given it's an island away, you can start seeing that perhaps it is not beyond the realm of possibility to see a nuclear weapon being used. I mean, they've also got the danger, say, of the Iranian development, the fact that they are presumably at breakout stage already, the fact that if you had another nuclear power emerging onto the scene into a volatile region with a leadership that, again, seems to have a very casual view of how you might use the nuclear weapon. I would suggest that we're at a stage on the human front, on the nuclear front, of one for the first time in many decades where we are, facing the prospect of potential problems there. So I think, on that side, we've got the nuclear threat. I've got some things to also say about artificial intelligence, which is a topic all on its own, of course. And we've seen, of course, the recent upsurge just in the last month. Amazing sort of things that have come to the fore, given the developments in that field. And I want to stress, I'm by no means, I'm not a doomster or a gloomster about these things. I think, of course, AI, has potentially wonderful possibilities. But if there is not an ethical framework in place for its using, if there is not joined up working along the lines of what you're doing internationally on this, you do run the risk of potential accidents occurring, systems developing beyond human control potentially. It's a long way off, but these things we have to start thinking about now, and potentially some catastrophic event there occurring where autonomous AI, even with weapon systems or others, link together and decide humans are a threat rather than a solution, and we could end up there. So I think plenty to worry about where we might be going.
Thanks, Alan. So I will ask you soon whether we should be pausing AI, as some people have been suggesting. I'm not quite sure how they would achieve that, but I'll come back to you on that. But Lawrence, can I said I would ask you how a combined effect would help. Can you explain what you're suggesting and how you think it would help?
Well, easy solution is that there is a white paper I jointly wrote with RUSI, or United Services Institute, over 10 years ago, which was a consequence-based approach to resilience, combined effect. And it really is very, very simple approach in that currently organizations, public sector, private sector organizations, approach what they do from a perspective of risk, mainly. And it's individualistic risk. And from risk drives your governance, policy, your budgets, training. So when you come down to being interoperable, and it doesn't matter whether interoperability is around systems, technology, but importantly around policy, policy needs to be interoperable as well. If you're driving an individual risk register, being interoperable is very, very difficult when you come to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. If organizations stepped back and approached a collective approach to risk with an understanding of the shared outcomes that they're looking to achieve, and then a joint approach to get there, and you look at governance, people, process, technology, information and infrastructure in that shared outcome, collective risk perspective, you can then start to understand in a collective way who has the capability, who has the capacity, who has the responsibility, and who has the risk. And you can do trade-offs. So you can then create a shared governance and a collective approach and understanding of risk, a collective risk register, which people, organizations can then create their own individual risk register. And that applies not just in infrastructure, it applies in ecosystem development for sustainability, green neighborhoods, and so on.
Is there not then a risk that with everybody owning that particular risk, nobody owns it?
So you own your individual risks, responsibility for your individual risks, and there's an understanding of the collective shared risk, MOUs and collective agreements in place as to who carries and is responsible for that risk. And the classic example is in policing in the UK, community policing. There is a mechanism called the Strategic Policing Requirement, which places responsibility for civil contingencies and cyber on all of the agencies. Bizarrely, are those agencies which make up local resilience force. Yeah, the local resilience force aren't included. And it would set out how all of those organisations, usually chaired by the police, go about responding to cyber or civil contingencies events. And what's missing from it, and maybe police and crime commissioners have way to it, is almost a commercial understanding, commercial agreement between the different agencies, between fire, police, health, local authorities, as to who owns what risk, who has responsibility, who has capacity, and who has capability to mitigate those collective and individual risks. And if you treat it like a commercial engagement, then that question doesn't arise.
Okay, thanks. Right, now it's your turn, you lot. Please, would you begin to think of or even ask some questions? That would be good. And there may be some questions from the audience online, in which case, Chris, you will tell me what they are. Yes. And you will put them over. If anybody has a question for any of our panelists now, then wave your hand and shout. Yes, gentlemen.
Yeah, I'm very impressed by the credentials and the expertise represented in the room. My organization is focused on trying to popularize awareness of these issues. And it seems, looking at the history, you mentioned EMP, or the risk of coronal mass ejections, very little awareness among the political masses, if you will, compared to, say, climate change or rate advocacy, anti-nuclear movement. So not just for this panel, but I'd be very interested in hearing both from members here, but other panelists, other people during this conference, about how we might raise awareness of these issues to the ordinary people who ultimately will determine whether utility policy, government policy addresses these issues effectively.
Great question. And I will expect some solutions to all of these questions from you as well. What is your organization like?
It's called Resilient Utilities Now, and it's made up of a group of business leaders who recognize that we are not electrical engineers or utility representatives, but we recognize that without some popular support for the investment that will be required at the infrastructure level, that very little will be achieved. That I think many of the people that I've talked to over the years are frustrated by the lack of attention to, in our particular case, EMP and CME as a very low risk but extremely high impact threat to the whole world potentially.
Personally, I think it has. I'm going to come to Alan in just a moment to ask him to answer your question. You lucky chap. But I personally,
yeah, you're on the House of Lords, James. You can answer this. It's directed at you.
I personally think it's not a low risk. An EMP is not a low risk at all. We're going to have another Carrington event shortly. We're going to. Putin has been testing EMP weapons. China is well, but I said I was going to come to you, Alan.
Well, I think James has passed the buck here, because I do think, obviously, as a parliamentarian here, and of course know that Congressman Trent Franks is here as well, he could perhaps tell you how you influence the US Congress. But the reality is that you're right, there is a big problem in the literacy of politicians on these issues. And frankly, it's down to bandwidth. Politicians face so much coming at them, whether it is their own local constituency, area issues, it is the one or two things they might have a particular interest in. And already at that point, you're crowded out from any of the other vitally important things. You may just register a blip. I'm sure you can speak to the sort of burdens on members. And here, certainly, they don't have big offices. To address this, you really have to catch the public imagination. But it may take a long time. And the climate change issue, if you think about how long it's taken to develop into an issue which most people actually understand in a way, you had, blips. I remember, as a kid in the 80s, you had the whole CFC issue, banning aerosol cans, all the rest of it. You started getting little pinpricks emerging on this. But it's taken 30, 40 years for this to really capture the public imagination to a point where everyone recognizes it's dangerous. And I think you have a mixture, obviously, of, sort of the scientific community coming together to sort of put a point of view, although we know there are divergent opinions, of course, even there. But you get a sort of body of opinion that says X. You then get people individuals starting to pick this up into campaign groups, into newspapers, into politicians, and then eventually you do have the makings of a global movement. But the reality is, to get to that point, you either have to expend huge resources to sort of attract people's attention, or you just have to plug away year on year to make a note. The trouble is, as we pointed out, something like an EMP or a solar flare could occur tomorrow, and we wouldn't be ready for it. So the real question is, how do you get politicians to focus on the important issues? Again, I would say you've got to go for the if you like a beachhead in, you've got to pick 2 or 3 people who really want to champion this, who build a force, and it can be done very quickly, by the way. To give one example, the whole turnaround different example of what we're talking about, the whole turnaround to relations to China has occurred in a very quick time. And it's occurred because a group of people within different parliaments has gone, we think there's a threat, and they've moved up the agenda, and it's come last decade as opposed to the 40, 50 years of climate change. So you can see this moving quicker, but it does need focusing from a top level.
I'm going to ask Yoav to answer this, but after he's had a go at it, because we have got Trent Franks in the room, Trent, I would love it if you were able to say what you were able to achieve by bringing this up the agenda in the United States Congress. That would be really impressive. But I'll come to Yoav first, and then you, if I may.
Thank you. So yeah, speaking power is a thing that you can do. And I think, let me take from my own experience in Israel, climate change was perceived until 4 or 5 years ago as something abstract that does not affect the Israel economy or the Israel national security. So what we did was, a couple of scientists, we talked to certain, I'd say, advocacy groups, like Decarbonize Israel 2050, and we stressed that climate change in our region, in the Middle East, which is a vulnerable hotspot, where things will happen quicker and with a very large amplitude quite soon, is actually a national security aspect, because it will cause geopolitical instability in the entire region. So Israel considers itself like an island, an energy, independent island, but our neighbors are not. They're interconnected. They are more vulnerable than us, and if they topple, we will see a cascading effect that will hamper the entire stability of an already unstable region of the planet. So when we spoke to those guys, it suddenly percolated into the Ministry of Defense in Israel, which is the largest, most powerful ministry in the government. So when you talk about national security or climate change or even extreme events as a national security threat, they listen, and it can go all the way up. That's one point of speaking to power. And to your point, sir, about educating the public, I think this is already being done, but not in a systematic way through the education, the formal education system. What is happening is that, popular media takes a specific angle of those extreme event scenarios. I would call them Black Mirror scenarios, and they go, to nuclear attacks, AI misuse, or, disasters spawned by climate change and others. And so we see like Hollywood really good at doing those kind of end of the world scenarios. But, I teach undergrad students, and those kind of scenarios have the opposite effect of, frightening and even causing despair. So we cannot tell how worse it's going to get without offering a solution or, some comforting. We will build the system strong enough to cope with those threats. It's no use of just saying, a CME or a Carrington-style event will blow us back into the dark ages. We have to find a way to tell that, yes, we are on top of it. We are getting ready. This conference is one of the things that we're doing.
Great. Trent, in a couple of sentences, can you tell us what you did to actually get the American Congress on top of it?
Well, I will do that. I might to point out that I think James Arbuthnot is one of the anchors in the world on this issue. And I think we were all grateful to be among him. And Alan Mendoza, there has been a great friend of mine. I think he's one of England's great policy experts. And if I want to know what's going to happen in America, I ask Alan. I'm just so grateful to be with both of you. I chaired the EMP caucus in the U.S. Congress. And to make it very short, we were able to collectively pass the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, which I sponsored. And we attached it to the defense bill. And the result was that we were able to harden all of the grid mechanism going into the Pentagon, to NORAD. Our entire missile defense capability is hardened against EMP, and as well as, of course, our offensive nuclear deterrent is hardened against EMP. So those are just starting places, but I will assure you that people will respond to this issue if we have a sustained and committed effort within the various parliaments. And I don't know how to express how much a part all of you are of that process.
Well, thanks very much, but I think you started it. And so you and Avi together have achieved the most fantastic amount over the years. Yes, gentlemen there.
I want to make a quick comment. The gentleman down here mentioned how busy legislators are, and certainly executive branch members are just as busy getting to U.S. presidents. Probably impossible, you would think. I recommend we consider looking forward, skate to where the puck is going to be, as Wayne Gretzky said, and see who the future leaders are likely to be. On the issue of China, back in 2010, I wrote a book called Death by China, and I was concerned about the issues that are now just coming to fore. I mailed it to 50 people I thought might be future political leaders in the United States. One of them was Donald Trump. My co-author in 2017 ended up being the head of President Trump's manufacturing and trade office, and we significantly influenced the policy by simply looking ahead and seeing who we thought, because you could never get to the current president of the United States, but you might get to the one that's going to be president in 6 or 10 years. So think about influencing the people you see coming up.
Good thought. Thank you. Right now, we have 1 minute left for each of our panelists to say what they forgot to say in the opening session. Right, Lawrence.
I would just say, having heard the conversation about EMP and so on, a consequence-based approach. I mean, you know, the consequences of a flood, famine, locust, EMP, you know, are broadly similar. They take out infrastructure, prevent society functioning. And if you plan and prepare and put in place your response recovery mechanisms on the basis of consequences, then generally you don't have to worry too much about the cause because you're prepared.
Thank you. Alan?
Well, just get ready for problems before they become problems. I think, you know, I mentioned AI briefly. The reality is that bad actors out there are already planning to use AI. They're already using it now on phishing attacks, other things, but it could be much more serious, obviously, going forward. So one of the key things is if we know there's a threat coming down the line or a potential threat, don't turn to it. Turn it into some action now while a technology is nascent, before it becomes established and before you have to deal with its manifestation in problematic state. So governments need to get together on this, corporations, and work together to find some fail-safe solutions here.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a thought. Next week, I'm going to be at the European Geosciences annual meeting in Vienna. And it came, I was thinking that we as scientists in the big science conferences never discuss those stuff that we will be discussing this week. And I think this is this chasm between this community and the general climate earth science community should be minimized or closed. In a sense, I would propose next week that in next year, EGU or in the American Geosciences Geophysical Union meeting in San Francisco this December, there's going to be sessions on those resilience and, you know, critical events that can hamper the existence of humanity.
Thanks very much. My own contribution to getting the public to think about this is that when, for me, all of this began, which actually was because I went to see the James Bond film GoldenEye and thought, is this real? And then I listened to Avi, who came to talk to the House of Commons, and thought, yes, it really is real. There's something about this. So I began to talk about it 25 years ago, and everyone thought I was bonkers. Then people stopped thinking I was bonkers and began to listen to me and say, are you really sure? I mean, is there anything here? Then people, after about 10 years of that, began to say, actually, you may be right. Now we're in a position where governments are saying, yes, there is a real problem. The next step, it would be quite nice to get to, would be to say, and here are the answers. And the governments are putting in place the answers. That is gradually beginning to happen in Israel, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. So we're getting there. It just takes one hell of a long time. Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panel for a most interesting and helpful discussion of these subjects, and pass over to Chris Beck, who is going to chair the next panel.
Thanks, James. Let me invite Persia, David, and Mark to come down for the next panel.
Specific course, psychological, so how to cope with this future. They are getting depressed. Okay.
Right, just to keep you posted, after this session, we're going to have a short break. Okay, so the whole process for a coffee. No more croissants. I'm not anymore. No, it wasn't funny, huh? No funny. Okay, I'm trying my best. It's been a tough morning, as you can imagine. So we have Mark here, Persia, and David, and Chris is going to manage the panel.
Yes.
And
Thank you so much, Leahy. Thank you. In like fashion, I want to welcome David, Mark, and Persia here. So David is from the Edison Electric Institute, focused on cyber and infrastructure security. Mark Ilarducci, former director of California Office of Emergency Services, and Persia Payne-Hurley here from North Carolina Division of Emergency Management. So I want to let you do a quick, say, introduction of yourself and what we're going to be focusing on today. The topic of this panel is from disaster to black sky. So we have emergency managers and also, in a sense, an emergency manager in the electric sector, focusing on these kind of issues. And what we're talking about is, can we take some lessons from the disasters that we have been seeing